you like me to pitch in along the way for a little bit, or shall I just listen?
I think you can pitch in. I think I like conversation, and it'll take me a moment to adjust the camera when you start talking. But I think, of course, major discussion will be this way.
Exactly.
Yeah, I could try whatever else.
Yeah, I want to test it out and see.
Jerry Rodesh, R-O-D-E-S-C-H.
And your first name, you go by Gerald.
Jerry.
Gerald.
No one calls me Jerry.
Okay.
Turn it on when you start.
Date of birth and place of birth just for...
Sure. Born December 23rd, 1938 in Sheboygan. Grew up in Port Washington.
It's helpful to have a monitoring mic, because when things go wrong, so you know, an hour doesn't go by and then you realize that something was wrong. I don't know if that has an earphone. I learned the hard way on that.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I was disappointed that these things don't have a playback. You've got to put them up to an amplifier or download them.
University of Wisconsin, Green Bay, and...
Okay. First of all, can you start by speaking your name and then spelling it?
Sure. My name is Jerry Rodesh, R-O-D-E-S-C-H.
And your first name? You go by Gerald.
Jerry.
Jerry.
No one calls me Jerry.
Okay. Okay.
For what?
Date of birth and place of birth is for...
Sure. Born December 23rd, 1938 in Sheboygan. Grew up in Port Washington, Wisconsin. Lived most of my life here. And I was surprised that I had an opportunity to come back to Wisconsin. And delighted to do so. I had some doubts about the experimental nature of the institution, having read the catalog.
Yeah, that's much better. Okay, we're talking about the history of University of Wisconsin Green Bay, and maybe you can start off by giving me a little bit of your history of your relationship with UW Green Bay.
I came to UW Green Bay in September 1971. I'd been hired the previous winter for what I was told was an experimental university in the UW system. I knew the UW system, but I had done my undergraduate work at Madison, and I was surprised that I had an opportunity to come back to Wisconsin, and delighted to do so. I had some doubts about the experimental nature of the institution. Having read the catalog, I was somewhat confused by the intentions, and I had also been clued in by some of the people who hired me that the department that hired me was not totally sold on the academic plan, so that I should be careful politically about where I committed myself.
Okay, well that's interesting. Now how do you go looking for a job? I mean, you saw an ad in a journal?
I attended the meeting of the American Historical Association in Boston that winter. And there are postings of jobs at conventions like that, and I signed up my interest and was offered an interview by the recruiters who were there. There were two historians, may have been three historians from Green Bay who were at the convention whom I talked to, one of whom I had known before, many years prior to that. And they explained the university to me, and I said I was really interested in the position. In fact, there was a depressed job market, very difficult for historians to find jobs, so I was interested in practically any position, but I thought it was a special opportunity to come to a new place that was as ambitious as Green Bay sounded.
And what did it sound like? Not what you found, but what was the portrayal of it?
It sounded like much of the dreaming that went on in the 1960s about reform in various areas. It had not been worked out clearly in every detail. The rhetoric was bureaucratically flowery and somewhat off-putting. But by the end of the 1960s, this would have been I would have been there over just after Christmas of 1970. I was pretty used to kind of wild ideas being tested out, as was the whole country at that point. So that even though some of it seemed to me not very well focused, I thought it still should be interesting, and probably would have a chance to at least work out the idea.
What kind?
Just after Christmas 1970 would have been for the AHA meeting, right?
Right, at the convention for the American Historical Association. And I think I was offered the position probably at the beginning of spring. And I was just finishing my dissertation, so I wasn't spending a lot of time researching the university at that point. I was trying desperately to get the dissertation finished, and I got to Green Bay in July of '71. My family and I found housing quickly, and I began to prepare my first classes. My view of the university was really, at that point, as an outsider. I was trying to feel my way into the institution. I was told which courses I would have. They were fairly conventional courses, with the exception of a liberal education seminar, which people had a great deal of difficulty explaining to me. It was the sophomore LES course, which was supposed to connect learning to the community, with a first semester researching, defining, discussing, reading about a problem, and the second semester, ideally, going out into the community and engaging in efforts to deal with the problem, which could be in the form of an extended internship for an entire semester or practicum, some combination of work in the community and classwork.
You had teaching experience before?
Yeah, I had taught both as a teaching assistant and my own courses at both Rutgers College and Douglas College, which was the women's college at Rutgers University, where I completed my doctorate.
Okay, let's talk about your dissertation. Your friend of mine, I know you must have really gotten into it, so what century were you in? What world were you in when you...
I did a very conventional dissertation in intellectual history, a study of political thought in the late 18th and early 19th centuries.
Bring in Howard Wynne?
I should have, because I was one of the very few people on campus who had really focused graduate study on the period before the 20th century. Because of the experimental orientation of the curriculum, this was a very present-oriented campus. Everything was supposed to be focusing on real problems in the world now. And as a result, very few faculty were recruited from periods whose fields dealt with periods before the 20th century. I think there may have been at most a half dozen of us.
So what kind of political, if you would give me a little bit more detail about your dissertation or political theory of...
Okay, I used the ideas particularly of John Adams and his son John Quincy Adams. They both had very strong historical philosophies and had read a great deal about history, particularly the history of the Middle Ages. They had written a great deal about it. So I thought this was a chance to look at a window into their minds that hadn't been explored before. What were American founders doing looking at the Middle Ages in the late 18th century? And I found that they were more or less, Father John Adams was more or less deliberately trying to help create a society which was the opposite of the Middle Ages. He believed in an enlightened time, and the Middle Ages were the Dark Ages, so it was a very clear contrast. And as a result, he read a great deal about Roman Catholicism, about feudalism, and about European history, and set about trying to help create a society which was as unlike that as it could possibly get. His son, John Quincy Adams, was fascinated by the Middle Ages as well, but he was attracted to it. He thought it contained elements, particularly within the cultural system, that were missing in America at our loss. He spent much of his early career as a diplomat for the United States in Europe, and he was very much taken in by classical European painting and architecture and medieval history. And what he thought the United States was at the leading edge of progress, and that we had created a constitutional system that could accomplish that, and we had all the means at our disposal for economic development. But what we needed was a moral vision that he found lacking, and he thought was the Middle Ages provided a picture of how a society could have a moral vision. and integrate that into a political and economic system. So he dedicated his life to trying to find a way to come up with a 19th century equivalent of a moral vision that could infuse our culture and make the political and economic systems operate. There was an exchange between them. I could go on for a very long time about
Go on
this.
for just a couple more minutes on this because you got a thought yet to go.
He wrote, John Quincy Adams wrote to his father on one occasion that what balance was for you, the constitutional system of balance, powers, checks and balances, and an attempt to prevent any element in the society from dominating the political system. Union is for me. So father balanced this mechanical system of the Constitution, and for John Quincy Adams it was union. And he talked about union in terms of the family. The family is first of all founded on a legal contract between a husband and wife, and with their responsibilities for their children. But it needs more than a contract. It needs some moral basis for a fusion of the elements. And so he comes to think of the United States as a union infused with a moral purpose, and people connected not simply by political ties, but by moral ties. And this led him directly into taking leadership in reform movements, because reform movements that would get rid of evils in American society, particularly slavery. So he becomes, for a time, the leading American anti-slavery spokesman. And fighting, after he lost the presidency, he went and ran for Congress and served in the House of Representatives and was there a spokesman for the anti-slavery movement, because the United States can never achieve its moral purpose if slavery still exists. So what he's trying to do is to achieve truly a more perfect union. And he fights a courageous fight. You may have seen the film Amistad about the slave ship. And John Quincy Adams played a major role in using that case to make the anti-slavery cause. He really fought it down bitterly, so much so that he dropped dead on the floor of the House of Representatives in the course of a later
You just
debate.
set me on a new reading path. Now I have to find out. But this brings up now. I could see some analogies to the city on the hill over there.
Oh yeah, absolutely. The Adamses are from Boston.
Yeah, how do you relate that though to the building of a new university in a new wilderness,
Oh,
starting afresh?
Great question. Great question. I think there's a real contrast there. I don't think the early founders had much interest in where they came from. They were much more committed to where they were going. So I don't think...
You're talking about the university, you're talking about...
I'm talking about Edward Widener and whoever worked with him in developing the academic plan. They had very little obvious regard for the traditions of American higher education. They really tried to break out of the mold. And Quincy Adams and John Adams were both reformers, but they founded their reform in a very profound study of history and an attempt to use that study as a guide for the future.
Well, it seems to me that see, I see that almost a direct analogy. We're free of however they did it in Europe, and we're going to create a society here, and that sounds like what UWGB. So I'm surprised to hear you.
Well, John Adams would have fit more easily, but John Quincy Adams said, "No, you guys made a mistake. You threw out some of the good stuff." And so I came with a kind of John Quincy Adams point of view. That's a good idea to come up with a refreshed vision of higher education, but you can't lose what really lay at the heart of it. Which was its, if you want, its moral purpose, its cultural purpose, its purpose for the individual, because it's the individual's cultural and moral development which makes that person a citizen. It's not the accumulation of credits or preparing oneself to do a particular job in the community. It's the transformation of the individual. so that the person can connect to the community through knowledge of its heart. So you need to study history and literature and philosophy.
So UWGB lack that?
Yeah.
Lack moral purpose?
Well, if you look at the themed colleges and the development of themed colleges, environmental sciences, community sciences, human biology, and creative communication, there's no obvious place for history, literature, philosophy there. There's no humanities component that obviously fits. I think Widener and the planners imagined creative communication to include the humanities, but essentially as auxiliaries to people who were involved in the communications field. We taught them how to read and write, maybe. We gave them enough cultural content, names, places, dates, so that they could write about whatever subject they had without being totally adrift. But there was no central place for the humanities. And I thought, you don't even define problems unless you have a moral or cultural perspective.
So what did you see them doing?
Well, that's what I tried to do in the first year, was trying to figure out what they were in fact doing. And because I was a new faculty member, I didn't begin at the top, and I didn't really have a clear picture of the university as a whole at the beginning, because I had responsibilities in a field that I needed to work on, because I didn't have a full range of courses before, so I had developed courses. I found one of the ways it worked for me, a very exciting way, was an American documentary theater project, which brought together an interdisciplinary faculty and group of students. And of course, this was one of the terms of the university. We are organized on interdisciplinary lines. And I found a way to make that meaningful for me by joining this project, which involved a theater person, Professor Paul Mann, a writer, Professor Tom Churchill, and me, a historian. And we would get together, and I would lead a group of students doing historical research on a problem area. And for the first problem, we chose Native Americans in northeastern Wisconsin and some aspect of the problems and relationships that had developed between the European settlers and the Native peoples. As our theme, as our problem focus, if you want, for a period of a couple of years. So initially I led a group of students
Go ahead.
In doing research, which involved library research, involved going off campus and meeting with people on reservations, indeed even camping some on the Menominee Reservation. And in the second phase of it, second semester of it, Tom Churchill led a group of students in the writing program to develop a script based upon that initial research, and then I would do some, and my students would do some additional research to feed into the script they're developing. And in the third phase of it, Paul Mann was going to produce a play. So you had people from three different fields working together on a problem that brought them together, and that we brought students together also from different fields working on a common problem, and that students and faculty were in collaboration together, trying to bring whatever we knew and could learn to bear on the problem. And it was a problem that we saw in the community, and that we partly relied on community advice for it, in the form of interviews with particularly people on the Menominee Reservation. We also had colleagues in other fields helping us with it. Professor James Clifton, an anthropologist, really became our contact with the Menominee during that period. And it I think would have been the kind of thing very difficult to do at another institution because we crossed department lines. We had to get budget support from different departments, but it was relatively simple at Green Bay to do that. And this is only one example of things that were going on like that, as people were finding ways to connect themselves to what the university is supposed to be about.
So you're hoping to create this new form of education, is what you're saying?
Yeah, we were essentially given a license to find out how we can contribute to this educational idea. Of course, one of the things that makes it difficult is it's expensive to do that. It takes time to get people from different fields together to feel each other out and be able to talk to each other. And one hopes that over time you would develop a kind of ease and collaboration, but it's harder to do. It takes more time than for a bunch of historians in the history department who control their own budget. We speak the same language as historians, but we don't necessarily speak the same language that theater people do. In fact, we don't at all usually. And this was an opportunity to do something that would be very hard to do elsewhere.
Did any one of the collaborators find it tiresome or burdensome to do this, or did they find it stimulating and they stayed up all night working?
Both. We found it tiresome, burdensome, and stimulating. And we were very disappointed when we couldn't get the funding for the last stage, and when finally, after that delay, Professor Mann left for another institution.
Yeah, no, this is, I think, just for the purpose of this record and also for research, what was it labeled? If I go to archives and start looking for things, was there a course title? Was there a project title?
Yeah, it was called the American Documentary Theater, and it should be listed under that label. It was supported by money from a program administered by the University of Wisconsin system called Teaching Improvement Grants. And there was also to be NEH money, and one hoped down the line perhaps NEA money to support it. In the early 70s, however, that kind of money, both at the state level and the national level, was getting harder and harder to get, and the UWG budget was in serious decline, so that the American Documentary Theater was not established in Green Bay. But
is there any way, has anybody done any actually quantification, like how many staff hours, how many dollars did this project cost versus a traditional school conducting some other program?
I think there may have been some attempts to do that because we were required at a number of points by the University of Wisconsin system administration to come up with workload analysis. But I don't think anybody felt that we found a satisfactory way to do that. Partly because we don't have an hourly compensation system. We take on projects and we can spend a lot or a little time with them, depending upon what we think they demand. And we're held responsible for the product, but we really operate as professionals. We don't bill by the hour. We offer a variety of courses, we engage in research, we engage in a variety of projects, and we expect to be held accountable in terms of outcomes rather than hour-by-hour schedules. So it's very hard to work that out.
Jerry, you were referring earlier to the Wisconsin system really not getting in place operationally for a while. So my bet is that those workload reports, which I remember as well, which I think you had to fill out once a year, which asked you to talk about how many hours you spent in class, how many hours you spent in direct class preparation.
This is good to hear this.
Sure. So we talk about how many hours you spend in class, how many on class preparation, how many hours you spend in committees. This was all self-reporting based on a typical week. And of course, there's no such thing as a typical week. Some weeks are all class because it's in the middle of midterms and you're just barely managing to keep your head above water grading. Other times, you're really zeroed in on a report that's coming out of the committee, and that's what you're primarily doing.
Hold on for a second here, I want to raise this. Also get identified on
State your name and
this tape.
spell it.
My
And
name
your birth date. Yeah, this is kind of like for an oral history. You need to have, like, who is this person? Really? Is it Dee Jones?
is Joan Ellis Wozniak.
Okay, so for the purposes of data
For the
collection,
record.
for the record, could you please tell us who you are? Can you show us your fingerprints? Okay.
And you grew up in
I'm
Chicago?
Sid Bremer. Full name Sidney, S-I-D-N-E-Y, last name Bremer, B-R-E-M-E-R.
And you joined the university,
Also in September of 1971, although only as part-time. I think I was an ad hoc lecturer during my first year, and I was responsible for teaching 2 classes each of the 2 semesters that I was hired. So it would have been equivalent to 2/3 of the faculty load for one of those semesters, although I think the ad hoc lectures had a heavier load, so it's about half time. They were paid by the course, in fact, as I recall now.
so the point is that the statement is made, well, this is more expensive to teach this way. Well, how did you know it was more expensive? How did anybody know it was more expensive if you don't keep track of those sorts of things?
Well, partly we did an awful lot of team teaching
Yes.
and teamwork, and what Jerry's talking about with the American Documentary Theater was, after all, 3 faculty members. We had a lot of classes where we worked it out so that we could take 2 classes which would otherwise be taught singly by faculty and put them together so they would look like the same student-faculty ratio as if they had been entirely separate. But in addition to teaching whatever work you did for your own preparation for your half of that, you also did a lot of coordinating work. So a lot of this information is anecdotal. And what you would find in the records would be these faculty workload reports, which were, as Jerry said, a requirement that the system put on us, primarily, I think, to be able to have some documented way of talking to the state legislature about how much faculty work, because people generally saw faculty work as defined by the number of hours in the classroom. And as professionals, our responsibility was to make sure that those hours in the classroom were well prepared, and that we were also involved in governance activity at the university, and also doing research on our own, which might or might not have anything directly to do with our class.
So pretend I'm a legislator or a regent. And
This isn't
I'm talking to you, and I'm talking to people from the Wisconsin State Universities.
What's the thing?
How do you represent how much time you're putting into it? What your requirements are? Could you?
Well, I was basically working about a 60-hour work week on average. Most of the time I filled out those reports, and I'm remembering them coming in, Jerry, before I got tenure, which would mean pre-79, but maybe around 76, 77. Does that sound about right?
Yeah.
So I could talk about that.
Oddly enough, when I was at University of Wisconsin System Administration for a period of years in the late 80s and early 1990s, I was assigned to do workload studies for the system. And it was an extremely elaborate and time-consuming process to get the information. And it showed, we had a variety of ways of doing it. We had a number of faculty who agreed to keep hour-by-hour journals for a period of time. to show what they actually did during the day, and those journals were presented to the Board of Regents, and one regent said, "You mean you were really nursing your baby at the same time that you're correcting blue books at 2 in the morning?"
And the answer was yes.
Yes. That's how it's done.
Because so much of the faculty work is invisible. It's not happening in public. It's happening, and it's not even happening on the university campus. Ed Widener used to advise us, please do not mow your lawn at 10 in the morning, because your neighbors will think you are not working, even if you had been working until 2 a.m. the night before, but you were nursing the baby.
Yeah, well, and at Green Bay, we really did have obvious additional work, because we had an interdisciplinary department that we all had to belong to, because that's where the budgets were. Those are the units that hired, but we almost all of us belonged also to a disciplinary program. So compared to another institutions, we had automatically, to start with, twice as many committees, our discipline and the interdisciplinary program. And because this was a new institution on top of it, trying out an experimental program, we had all kinds of planning exercises going on all the time, defining what projects, what coursework, what majors were actually going to fit the academic plan, so that the committee work was absolutely staggering. And it was so elaborate that the junior faculty had to get involved in governance in the institution.